Thank you for that literally magnificent welcome, ladies and gentlemen. And it's a pleasure to be here tonight amongst friends and supporters and those who are, as one MP colleague put it to me this week, sound on Europe. I'm delighted to be here in Manchester to open the northern branch of Grassroots Out, the cross-party organisation to get you, the real people of Britain, not just its politicians, going out and making the case for the brighter future we can have if we leave the European Union. It's fantastic to see so many of you here. You have come here tonight because you all want one thing: to free Britain from the shackles of the European Union. A union which we were promised on entry would be a benevolent and mutually beneficial trading bloc. But sadly, it has turned out to be an increasingly overbearing, overblown, and over there, remote and irrelevant. Now, Grassroots Out has an important role to play in communicating this message to the people of Britain, who will be voting in the referendum which is likely to be held this summer. It is important as it is a cross-party campaign to leave the EU. It is important we put aside our political differences and join forces on issues of such fundamental importance to the British people. So committed am I to this idea of cross-party working that I'm going to do something contrary to all advice that Conservative MPs normally receive. I'm going to talk briefly about Nigel Farage. Now, ahead of my appearance here tonight, many people ask me, how can you share a platform with Nigel Farage? After all, Nigel's been pretty rude about our Prime Minister. Well, I have some news for you. Far from joining in with any hero worship, I have to tell you that I want to see Mr. Nigel Farage, MEP, out of a job. I want to see him and his colleagues redundant. Even Louise Bors, MEP, who gave such a kind introduction, and I thank her greatly for it. I'm sorry, Louise, but I want to see you out of a job too. I want to see members of the European Parliament, whether they're UKIP, Labour, Lib Dem, Green, or even Conservative, I want to see them all ditched. And you can't get more cross-party than that. I want to see them all ditched because I want to see the sovereignty of Parliament resting in our country, not in Brussels and Strasbourg. Now that we are united, we need to make the positive case for a strong, united and compassionate Britain outside the European Union. I encourage all of those who share this view to get involved with this grassroots campaign. So what are we up against? Last week, the Prime Minister presented us with the terms of the EU draft renegotiation deal, which he's managed to secure after months of negotiations with heads of state across Europe and senior heads of state like apparatchiks of the European Union, including Jean-Claude Juncker and Donald Tusk. The Prime Minister made out the case that this deal delivers substantial changes in Britain's relationship with the EU in order to protect our parliamentary sovereignty, to increase the business competitiveness of Europe, to keep us out of the euro, and to put limits on EU migration and migrants claiming benefits. Chief amongst the goods on offer was a red card system to reject new laws from Brussels, which the British Parliament does not agree with, and an emergency brake to end paying benefits to EU migrants during their first 4 years in this country. However, I'm sorry to say that I fear there is less to this agreement than meets the eye. And I feel that once the details are fully explained, it will also fail to pass the common sense test of the British people. The red card, it transpires, can only be played if 14 EU parliaments agree to do so, that's us plus 13 others, and does almost nothing to protect British interests. Similarly, the brake to migrants' benefits can only be used in limited circumstances, and so will do little to reduce the burden of EU migration and the burdens that places on our state. Therefore, surely the deal on offer falls far short of what most people will have imagined when we spoke of, quote, a fundamental renegotiation of our relationship with Europe. It was a fundamental renegotiation of our relationship with Europe which we were promised in the run-up to the last election, and which at the time most people surveyed said they wanted. However, the deal that has been brought back simply doesn't cut it. I do not, however, blame the Prime Minister for presenting the rather dilute offer now on the table. I believe he negotiated the best deal he could, but that he was never likely to come away with anything greater or anything stronger, because it would not have been accepted by other member states, nor the powers that be in the EU, most of whom are pathologically dedicated to the idea of further European integration. Faced with this kind of audience and struggling against the vast, sprawling and unwieldy machine of the EU, there was little the PM could have done differently, or more he could have achieved. However, red cards and emergency brakes aside, this is a fundamental question of who governs Britain, in the words of Edward Heath. And we have to admit that on that question, people in the UK are fundamentally out of step with the bureaucrats in the EU and see a very different direction of travel. And with regards to our relationship with the EU and the UK, it is not us, it's them, literally. That is not to say that while we are anti-EU, we're anti-European. I love and respect the diversity of cultures, people, languages, goods and produce, cuisines, histories that Europe contains. Indeed, this is what makes up the continent's strength. However, what we do object to is the seemingly incessant efforts of the EU, and particularly the European Commission, to trample over these diversities in order to smooth the way for ever closer political union. We feel the EU disrespects our differences, our diversities, and our freedoms. It saddles us with large swathes of law and regulations that suit our continental neighbours more than ourselves, but which the UK has to fall into line with. And it also prevents us from being able to conduct an effective immigration policy or to control our own borders. In addition, whilst Europe and the Eurozone are in managed decline, countries outside the EU are continuing to grow and strengthen. They are keen to trade with us, as we are with them. Yet the EU forces us to turn our back on the rest of the world as we become shackled to an increasingly self-important and inward-looking European Union bloc. I want to see Britain to be bold enough to say no. We can have a free, open, supportive relationship with both our EU partners and the rest of the world on an equal footing. This is not possible, however, under the current EU treaties, which seek to treat member states as belonging to a mutual support club and to protect and isolate the EU from the rest of the world. And were we to get out, we should not seek to make enemies of our European neighbours. We are friends and should remain so. But friends should not treat us as hostages, locking us into a club, playing a game whose rules we don't like and which isn't fun anymore. But rather they should act as friends who wish us well on our way, as we strengthen our relationships with new countries with a growing international presence, particularly in Asia and Africa. I think you will have gathered by now that I shall be voting to leave the European Union in the forthcoming referendum. Thank you. Now, over the next few months, I'm sure many column inches, blog pages will be filled with speculation and analysis about the date of the referendum and the question on the ballot paper. However, regardless of the date and the timing, forget the wording on the ballot paper. The only question we need to consider is this: do you believe Britain should be an independent sovereign nation or not? I know that in this hall tonight and across the country, many will appreciate the starkness of the choice and will vote to leave the European Union. Whilst I spend most of my time seeking to represent my constituency of Hazel Grove as a whole, on this question I shall be but one voice and one vote in that referendum. It is therefore now over to the British people to consider this renegotiation deal, to see what it delivers, and I look forward to speaking to many of my constituents over the coming months on the referendum campaign. And whilst I do not expect to agree with all of them, and they will not agree with me, I hope that many of them will not just vote through gut instinct or fear, but rather will examine the case closely to express their view and vote on what they believe is right for Britain. As I say, I may be a Member of Parliament, but I have just one vote and one voice in this campaign, and it's a voice which is in every way equal to each of yours. A key principle of Grassroots Out is that it's about you, the activists and supporters on the ground. This is the same core argument of the campaign to leave, that things are not better led from the top, not better led from the centre, not better led from Brussels, but led by us, the British people. That is why I'm pleased to see so many of you here tonight. You're going to be tasked with moving this debate out of the House of Commons, out of Whitehall, out of the TV studios, and put it onto the streets and the doorsteps, into your workplaces, in front of your family and your friends, to the people who need to hear it, the ordinary voter. Only by getting out there and working hard to deliver this message will we finally have a chance to get ourselves out of the EU. Thank you for being here tonight, and it's over to you now.